My name is Daniel Buhagiar. I'm a mechanical engineer by profession. I have a PhD specifically on offshore renewables, where I focused on storing energy from, for example, offshore wind farms and storing it in the marine environment for use with land-based consumers and also offshore consumers. And I currently work in the Netherlands, in Delft, with a spin-off from the University of Malta called Flask PV, where we are actually focusing on the commercialization of these types of marine energy storage technologies. My title formally is CEO, but we're a very small startup, so in a startup environment, the CEO does a bit of everything, which is fun and also a bit stressful, but primarily I would say my role is focusing on the commercialization of technology. So although there is a lot of research and development that is going on, also together with the University of Malta and the research group here, my role is more focused on adapting this research into a product that can eventually be sold and used by a number of consumers and operators. So, for example, I deal with our partners in the industry. We have a number of companies that we collaborate with, some of them being very large players in the offshore oil and gas sector. And so it's kind of managing those relationships and answering their questions and developing solutions or sizing systems based on their specific needs. I consider myself to be very lucky to actually be able to continue working on something that I worked on during my PhD. So the most satisfactory thing about my job is that we are actually commercializing a technology that I helped develop, and it's something that we had patented, so it's kind of something that we invented together with my professor at university, Professor Tonio Sant, and a colleague of ours, Dr. Robert Farrugia from the Institute for Sustainable Energy. So it was something we were doing here at university, and it was my PhD project. So it's very satisfying to now see large players in the offshore sector like oil and gas companies talking about it and considering it and looking at it as a real viable solution for existing problems. And I'd say whenever there is that what we call product market fit, where you see this could solve a real problem, that I think is for me the most satisfying part. We shifted a bit the team of the PhD towards this idea of could we come up with an energy storage system that is efficient and sustainable but can also be deployed offshore. Working in Malta, because of course we always look to the sea as a source of food, energy, and all of that. So land is limited, and just as we want to put renewables offshore, we also thought let's challenge ourselves and come up with a system where we could also store the energy offshore. And my PhD was that it was coming up with this idea of what we call hydropneumatic energy storage, which is basically storing energy as compressed gas and pressurized seawater. And it was numerical modeling, so simulations, lots of code, to come to a point where we saw that the system could work and we understood the physics and the thermodynamics behind it. And essentially that was my 3 years of PhD. Unfortunately, during the PhD, I did not really have any budget to do a lot of experiments, so it was mainly computational work. But towards the end of this project, we decided to apply for MCST funding to try and get some money to build a proof of concept prototype. And we were successful in getting that funding, and it was really a very big step for us, because we built a proof of concept prototype which we deployed in Malta in the Grand Harbor. And that was then my postdoc, so I just did another 3 years continuing on my PhD. It was a decision I had to make at the end of the PhD whether to go into industry and work in different lines of work, but this was a bit riskier because it was ultimately a 3-year, finite project. But it was very attractive just because I could put into practice what I had been working on from a theoretical level. Unfortunately, maybe in Malta, opportunities I see are growing, but it's still relatively limited in the sense of how many companies need people with PhDs. Northern Europe is where I'm mostly, in the Netherlands and Norway and Denmark and UK. It's almost a given that once you are in a certain position, you have a PhD. And not necessarily because you're doing super technical scientific work, but because they expect that kind of self-starting mentality and that sense of I want to figure out a problem, I want to figure out a solution, And that comes with most jobs in the maritime environment, because it's, you know, sort of a very challenging place. Everything is extremely complicated, be it the logistical side, the legal side, the technical side. So I really think that having a PhD has at least helped me find my place in this sector, and I think there are definitely a lot of opportunities now also that the green transition is really accelerating and renewables are becoming more and more kind of the status quo in that space. Yeah, the PhD gives you enough space. It sounds, you know, sometimes it sounds like the super intense process, but it's research, so sometimes it's not just about how many hours and for how many days and how many years. It's also about taking a bit of a break from that, like especially if you're stuck with a really difficult problem or a code won't work or something is not just... So in my case, I was actually doing some part-time work in industry in Malta, in the manufacturing industry. I could manage it alongside my PhD, but it also, I think that helped me to prepare to enter into the labor force as well. And it also allowed me to have some perspective on what I was doing in the PhD, and helped me also formulate my decision at the end of the PhD as to what to do. So I think the three most useful skills is, first of all, with a PhD, you start with having some idea of what you want to do. And as a student, you start with thinking that this is exactly what you need to be doing. And it's not. You start and then you figure out that there are other things that you should be doing and you need to adjust your course. So I think that kind of starting with what is essentially a blank sheet of paper and finding your way with the guidance of your supervisor, but it's more kind of finding your own way into what you want to do and what excites you in the research domain. Another skill, I think, is then kind of the self-starter mentality, because although, yes, you have PhD supervisor, some are more micromanaging than others. I was very lucky to have a really good supervisor who just kind of helped me find my way. And that can also be a challenge sometimes, because, again, you have to decide on your own initiative when you feel like working. You may have deadlines for some things, but most of the time it's more like how much time and effort you want to put into it. And I think the third one is something that I sometimes notice is a bit lacking in the professional space, is the ability to articulate a complex problem in a simple way. So we listen to scientific papers being presented in conferences, and they spend, you know, a lot of time, and you don't always understand what is going on. But sometimes, you know, I think doing a PhD helps you to actually be able to break that down in a way that the scientific community can understand it. And once you then go into the workforce, that means, for example, being able to give a presentation to a financial person who needs to make a decision on what money to spend. And you really need to be able to break it down into, this is option A, it costs so much, this is option B, it costs so much. And then you allow, you know, for something that is very complicated to be explained in a simple way. And that, I think, is a very important skill to have. A PhD is not a map of kind of like your professional journey, and you do a PhD in one specific thing and that's what you will do for the rest of your life. It's rather than a map, it's more of like a vehicle that can take you to many different places. Find a topic, find a subject that excites you. I think that's the most important thing, because you're going to be doing it for a number of years, and you're going to have to kind of motivate yourself throughout that process. But then once you have the PhD, it kind of defines you more as a professional, that you have had the ability to find a problem, to find a solution, or to make a contribution to better understanding that problem. So if you're not sure whether or not to do a PhD, if you find a topic that excites you, you're willing to dedicate a number of 3-4 years to it, and that in itself is a process that excites you, then go for it. And after the PhD, you will have a number of opportunities, and you can even decide to do something completely different. Graduates, broaden your horizons, think beyond the PhD, and employers also broaden your horizons and think beyond the person you're employing as this highly specialized unit, but rather as a Swiss knife of various skills that would have been acquired during the PhD, because really that is the kind of process that it is.